This is a Sikha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek16, Parshas Yisro, Sikha Daled, and the topic of the Sikha is that in this week's Parsha, we learn two psukim that speak of where Hashem was by Matan Torah, and we learn a teaching of Rashi on each of these psukim. And there are 5 parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe will, number 1, explain how we must understand the first of these 2 Rashis. Number 2, ask 9 or 4 questions, because it's 4 questions, but there are a number of points in each of the questions. So ask 9 questions on the 2 teachings of Rashi. Number 3, present the key to answering all these 9 questions. Number 4, based on this, answer all 9 questions. And number 5, present the inyanim nefloim, which are in Remez v'Said, in the deeper parts of Torah, in these 2 teachings of Rashi. On the pasuk which appears before the Aseret Dibros, where it says Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem descended upon Har Sinai, so Rashi quotes the words Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, and he explains Yochol Yared Olav Mamish. You would think that he actually descended onto Har Sinai. Talmud Lamer, the pasuk tells us later, after the Aseret Dibros, Hashem says Kimin Hashamayim dibarti imochem. I spoke to you from the Shamayim. And then Rashi continues and says, Malamed, this teaches us, as we'll see later in the Sikha, the rest of this Rashi. Now, simply we learn that Rashi over here is coming to answer the contradiction between the 2 psukim. That here it says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem descended upon Har Sinai, which simply means that Yard Olav Mamish, he descended upon the mountain. And later it says, Kimin Hashamayim dibarti amochem. Hashem says, I spoke to you from the heavens. So on a simple level, that's how we learn the Rashi, that he's coming to answer the contradiction between these 2 psukim. However, the truth is we can't learn that that's what Rashi is coming to do over here. And for 2 reasons. Number 1, if that's true, then why does Rashi begin with the words, Yachol Yared Olav Mamish? You would think that he actually descended upon it. He should have right away begun with the question. Rashi should have said, it says over here, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, v'kosav echad omer, and another pasuk says, Kimin Hashamayim dibarti imochem, that Hashem tells the Yidden, I spoke to you from the heavens. Why does Rashi begin and say, you would think he actually descended on the mountain? What's that start and beginning of Rashi? And number 2, the main question is that the contradiction between the psukim only arises by the later pasuk of Kimin Hashamayim. So why does Rashi address the contradiction in our pasuk? So it can't be that that's what Rashi is doing. He's not coming to address the contradiction, because if he was coming to address the contradiction, number 1, he would start right with the contradiction. And number 2, that's not something you do over here, because there's no contradiction when we learn this pasuk. It only arises when we learn the later pasuk, which appears after the Aseret Dibros. And this question is especially strong since Rashi indeed does address the contradiction in the later pasuk. So what's he doing over here? Clearly over here he's not addressing the contradiction. Therefore, as a result of these 2 questions, we must say that this Rashi isn't coming to answer the contradiction between the 2 psukim. Rather, what's Rashi doing here? It's that in this pasuk itself, before we know of the later pasuk of Kimin Hashamayim, there's actually a doubt whether Yarad Olav Mamish or not. And as we'll see in the Sikha, that's how the Rebbe understands the words Yachol Yarad Olav Mamish, that there's a doubt whether Hashem actually descended on Har Sinai. So when we learn our pasuk itself, we'll see why there's a doubt. We have to say that there's actually a doubt. And that's why Rashi starts right away and says, there's a doubt whether Hashem descended on Har Sinai. We're not sure when we read this pasuk whether he actually did or didn't descend on Har Sinai. And being that from here we cannot resolve this doubt, so therefore Rashi presents a proof from a later pasuk by saying, Talmud Lamer, look, we have an answer to our question, because it says, Kimin Hashamayim dibarti imochem. As Rashi continues, we'll see later in the Sikha how he resolves the question. So the point over here we're saying is that because of these 2 questions, we clearly see that Rashi is not coming to answer the contradiction. Rather, when we read this pasuk itself, we actually have a doubt. Did Hashem actually descend on Har Sinai or not? So Rashi says we have a doubt over here. Yachol Yarad Olav Mamish. We have a doubt whether Hashem did or didn't descend. So what's the answer? So because we have this question here, so Rashi says I'm going to give an answer from a later pasuk. Now that we have a proper understanding of Rashi, the Rashi is telling us that when learning this pasuk itself, it creates a doubt for us whether Yarad Olav Mamish. So now we have to understand what in this pasuk creates the doubt whether Yarad Olav Mamish. It would seem that when we read our pasuk, there's no doubt. It says Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, but we prove that Rashi is not coming to answer a contradiction. Rather, Rashi is telling us that when learning this pasuk itself, there arises a doubt whether Yarad Olav Mamish. So the question is, what brings up that doubt for us, whether Yarad Olav Mamish or not? So the explanation of this is, in an earlier pasuk it says, "V'har Sinai oshan kulai," that the entire Har Sinai was smoking, mipnei asher yard olav Hashem be'esh, because Hashem descended upon it in a fire. Now it says that the mountain was all in smoke, but not that it burned. Now seemingly l'cha'era, if the fire was yard olav mamish, so then the mountain shouldn't have burned, especially the vegetation which was there. As it says clearly, when Moshe Rabbeinu visited Har Sinai, when he saw the sneh, that on Har Sinai there was a sneh. And simply this wasn't the only sneh or vegetation on Har Sinai. Now we can say that it was a miracle that it didn't burn, that Hashem indeed descended onto the mountain in a fire, and it didn't burn because of a miracle. However, why make a special miracle, especially since a sneh already did burn by Har Sinai? Therefore, it makes more sense to explain that it was a natural occurrence. And we're going to say as follows, that since the Eish Hashem did not Yarad Olav Mamish, it didn't actually descend onto the mountain, but rather it remained above Har Sinai. So therefore, Har Sinai didn't burn, but rather it was just Oshan Kuloi, since the Eish Hashem was close to it. As we see, that's what happens when a fire is near something, that it makes it smoke. And therefore Rashi begins immediately by saying, Yachol Yarad Olav Mamish. There's a doubt over here whether Hashem actually descended on the mountain, because it says Oshan Kuloi. Since from the psukim here, there's room for doubt whether Yarad Olav Mamish, since it says Oshan Kulei and not that it burned. So that's the understanding for why Rashi begins right away and tells us that's the uncertainty over here. It's uncertain when we read this pasuk, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. There's a doubt whether it's actually Vayered. Maybe it's not Vayered. Maybe it's just that he came very close to the mountain, but he actually didn't fully descend onto the mountain. Now that we have the proper understanding of Rashi, this leads us into the first of our 9 questions, which is, why is it only a doubt whether Yared Olav Mamish, that therefore Rashi needs a proof from the later pasuk of Kimina Shamayim Dibarti Mochem, that Lo Yared Olav Mamish? Why is it only a doubt that we need a proof from the later pasuk if we already know it from the earlier pasuk of Har Sinai Oshan Kuloi, that clearly Hashem did not actually descend on the mountain, because it only smoked and it didn't burn? Now we're going to move on to present the rest of the Rashi and ask some questions on that. So after bringing the pasuk of Kimina Shamayim Dibarti Imachim, so Rashi explains, the Malamed, it teaches us, Shehirkin Shamayim Hol Yenim V'Tachteinim. Hashem bent down the upper and lower heavens, V'Hitzion Al Gabe Ahar, and he spread them upon the mountain, Kematza Alamita, like a bed sheet on a bed, V'Yored Kisei HaKavod Aleim, and the Kisei HaKavod descended upon them. So we see it's not Yored Olav Mamish. Hashem didn't actually come onto the mountain, but rather he brought down the upper and lower heavens. He spread them on the mountain like a bed sheet on a bed, and then the Kisei HaKavod descended onto these heavens that were literally like touching the mountain. And the Rebbe points out, and this is going to lead into 4 questions, that the source of this Rashi is in Mechilta. However, as we spoke many times, Rashi only quotes the teachings of Chazal that fit with Pshat and that are relevant to Pshuta Shemikra. And this is especially true over here, where Rashi doesn't mention the source for his teaching. So this proves that this teaching and all of its details are taken not from the Mechilta, but rather from Pshutei Shel Mikra. As we said, this leads into 4 questions. And we put all 4 questions in one, because they're really 4 diyukim in this part of Rashi. And the questions are, in order to explain both things, that on one hand, Vayer Hashem al Har Sinai, and on the other hand, Mina Shamayim Dibarti Imochem. So in order to explain how both things can be true, it's seemingly enough to say, Melamed Shehirkan Shamayim al Gabe Ahar V'Yard Aleim, that Hashem bent the heavens onto the mountain, and he descended upon them. What does Rashi take in Pshuta Shel Mikra that number 1, it's not Hirkin Shemayim, but it's Hirkin Shemayim Ha'elyenim V'Tachteinim, the upper heavens and the lower heavens. Number 2, not only Hirkin, that he bent them down, but also V'Hitzion, that he spread them. And number 3, in that itself, in what way did he spread them? Kematza alamita, like a bed sheet on a bed. And number 4, what does Rashi take it from? That it's not V'Yorad Aleim, but it's V'Yorad Kisei HaKavod Aleim. Now we're going to move on to see the Rashi on the pasuk of Kimina Shemayim Dibarti Yimachim, which, as we said, appears after the Aseres HaDibros, and we're going to ask 4 questions on it. First, we're going to ask 1 question, and then we're going to point out 3 details within this Rashi. So in addition to the questions on Rashi here, we also have to understand how Rashi here fits with his explanation on the second pasuk of Ki Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, where over there Rashi explains V'kos of Echad Omer. This pasuk over here, Ki Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, says Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem. I spoke to you from the Shamayim. V'kos of Echad Omer, another pasuk says, which is our pasuk, Vayerid Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem descended onto Har Sinai. So Ba Kos Vashlishi Ve'achichriya Beineim. The third pasuk comes and it resolves this contradiction. It says later on in Chumash Devarim, Min Hashamayim Hishmiyachas Kailoi Liasreka. Hashem let you hear His voice from the Shamayim Liasreka, in order to discipline, in order to rebuke you. V'ala Oretz Ha'acha Es Isha Yagdelo, and on the earth He showed you His great fire. So what do we see from here? Kvaydei b'Shamayim. Hashem's covet is in the Shamayim. V'isha ugverasei ala Oretz. His fire and His might are on the earth. Davar acher, another explanation, and this is the one that fits with our Rashi here. Hirkin Shamayim u'shmei Shamayim. Hashem bent down the Shamayim and the Shmei Shamayim. V'hitzion ala har, and He spread them onto the mountain. V'chein hu omer, and so too it says, both in Shmuel Beis as well as in Tehillim, Vayet Shamayim Vayerad. Hashem bent down the heavens and He descended. Now this is a wonder, it's perplexing. In our pasuk, Rashi only gives the pirush of Hirkin. And in that pasuk of Ki Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, Rashi, number 1, says another pirush. And number 2, he actually brings the only pirush here, the one that we have on Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, he brings it as the second pirush, which means that it's not the main one in Pshuta Shel Mikra. So number 1, he's bringing 2 pirushim, whereas by us, Rashi only brings 1. And number 2, the one that he brings over here, the only one that he brings here, when he brings it over there, besides bringing it together with another pirush, he brings it as the second pirush, which means that it's not the main one in Pshuta Shel Mikra. So that's a great wonder. Now we're going to move on to a lead up into 3 questions on the Rashi on the second pasuk of Ki Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, and all 3 questions are put into one because they're questions on 3 of the details in the Rashi. So we also have to understand, it makes sense that in the second pirush on Ki Min Hashamayim Yishmiachas Kailei, that Rashi skips some of the details. For example, Rashi doesn't say that Hashem spread it kematzo alamito, like a bedsheet on a bed. And he doesn't say v'yorat kisei hakavod aleim. So that makes sense to us. We could explain it. It's because he relies on his first pirush, which we just learned right before the Aseres HaDibros. However, we have to understand the changes in the second Rashi and the additions. Number 1, here in our Rashi on Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, Rashi says that Hashem brought down, He bent down the Shamayim ha'olyonim v'tachtonim, the upper and lower Shamayim. And here Rashi says that He bent down the Shamayim u'shmei HaShamayim. Why does Rashi make this change? Number 2, there in the second Rashi, he adds a proof from Vayet Shamayim Vayerad, which Targum Onkelos says on the pasuk Vayet Shamayim Vayerad, both in Shmuel and in Tehillim, he says that Vayet means Hirkin. So Rashi adds the proof. So the question is, if there's a need for a proof, then Rashi should have brought it in the first Rashi here on the pasuk Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. And number 3, if Rashi is not bringing down all the details like Kematz Alamito and V'yorat Kisei HaKavod Aleim, so why does he add V'yitzion ala har? He should have just said Hirkin Shamayim u'shmei Shamayim, and that's it. And this is especially difficult since when we look at the pasuk that Rashi brings as a proof of Vayet Shamayim Vayerad, like we said, Targum Onkelos translates it to mean Hirkin. He doesn't say the word of being Matzia. So Rashi should have just said Hirkin Shamayim u'shmei Shamayim and not added V'yitzion ala har. So the explanation in all of this is, and over here we're going to present the main point of the answer, as well as answer questions number 1 and number 3. So the explanation of all of this is as follows. The differences between the two Perushim of Rashi result from the general difference between the Psukim here and the Psukim later in the Parsha of Atam Risim Kimin Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem. So because the two groups of Psukim are communicating something different, as a result we have two different Perushim of Rashi. What are each of them communicating? So the Psukim here, by the Pasuk of Vayer Hashem al Har Sinai, they express how Hashem descended on Har Sinai in a manner that was revealed to everyone, and to the extent that the mountain itself became Kaddish, it received the Kedusha. As it says, if we look at the Psukim before the Asaras Adibros that are near the Pasuk of Vayer Hashem al Har Sinai, it says, Yishamru lechem aleis bahar. Be careful about going up and ascending the mountain, because the mountain's holy. Leisiga bayad. No hand should touch the mountain. The people cannot go up, they cannot ascend the mountain. Make a boundary around the mountain, and make it kaddish, make it holy. So all of these psukim are emphasizing how Hashem descended on Har Sinai. He came down to Har Sinai, and it was revealed to everyone. And it was to the extent that the mountain itself receives a kedusha. And according to this, we can now answer our first question. This is why Rashi needs a proof from the pasuk of Kimin Hashamayim, in order to show us that Lo Yaradol of Mamash, Hashem didn't actually fully descend on the mountain, but rather He bent the Shemayim Elyonim and Tachtainim, and He placed them on the mountain. He spread them on the mountain like a bedsheet on a bed, and then He came down on that. But it's not Yaradol of Mamash. But Rashi needs a proof for it, even though it says Vahar Sinai Oshen Kulei, which would seem to already teach this to us, that the mountain only smoked, it didn't burn. That means Hashem didn't actually come on the mountain. No, that's not enough. Because when the whole parsha comes out, that Yaradol of Mamash, it's telling us how Hashem did come to the mountain, and the mountain actually became Kaddish. So when you have the pasuk Har Sinai Oshen Kulei, it's not enough to tell us that Lo Yaradol of Mamash. And this is the reason why the pasuk of Har Sinai Oshen Kulei only places a doubt whether Yaradol of Mamash. And we need a proof from Kimin Hashamayim to see and to learn that Hashem spoke from the Shemayim and not Yaradol of Mamash. So our psukim over here are emphasizing and expressing how Hashem came down to the mountain, and it was revealed to everyone, and it was in a manner that the mountain actually became Kaddish. Whereas the parsha of Atam Risim Kimin Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, from after the Asaras Adibros, that comes to emphasize the opposite. It comes to emphasize how Hashem is high and distant from the earth. It's telling us Kimin Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, and as a result, the pasuk continues and tells us, therefore Lo Sasun Iti. Says Rashi, what does it mean, Leisasun iti? Leisasun d'musha moshay hamashamshim l'fonei b'marim. Don't make images of the angels that serve before me in the heavens, because I'm really much, much, much higher than that. So it's emphasizing how everything the Yidden saw is not Hashem himself. Hashem is much higher. Hashem is distant, removed. And now this answers our third question. Therefore, the first and main pirush in Pshuto Shemikra over there in the parsha of Kimin Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem is that Kveidei b'Shamayim and only Isha Yigverasei al Aretz. Hashem's covet is in the Shamayim. Only His fire and His might is on the earth, because this pirush emphasizes the loftiness and distance of Hashem from the earth. His covet didn't descend on Har Sinai, but rather remained b'Shamayim. Whereas the pirush that here can Shamayim, that Hashem bent the heavens, it doesn't fit well with the emphasis of Kimin Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, that it's all the way from the Shamayim. Here it's saying, no, here can Shamayim, so it's not so far, since the Shamayim came down to earth to Har Sinai. And the Rebbe points out in the Ora, it's not in the actual Sikha itself, that nevertheless the second pirush is needed. Because according to the first pirush, it's difficult. Number one, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai implies that also Kveidei descended, Vayered Hashem, not just Isha Yugverosei. And number two, to bring Kedusha to Har Sinai, you want actual Kedusha, you also need Kveidei in Har Sinai, and not just Isha Yugverosei. And we know that there was a Kedusha in Har Sinai. And therefore Rashi also needs the second pirush. Now we're going to move on to answering part of questions number 2 and number 4, which were the diyukim in the two Rashis. So according to this, it's also understood why Rashi here says, here can Shemayim ha'olyenim v'tachtainim, and over there Rashi says, here can Shemayim ushmei Shemayim. So the intention of Rashi here, like we said, is to explain the content of this parsha, which is the Yerid of Hashem on Har Sinai, just that it has to be in a manner that it doesn't contradict what it says, Kimin Hashamayim, and also what it says, Har Sinai Oshen, and not fire. And since it comes out of the psukim here that number one, Hashem himself, and number two, descended on Har Sinai, so we can't say over here that Hirkin was only one Shemayim, which would mean that between Hashem and Har Sinai there was only one Shemayim, because then it comes out that it's not the highest level, so to speak, of Hashem. It's not all of the heavens that came down, and the level of Hashem, which is above all of the heavens, was there. And therefore Rashi must add that Shemayim here refers to all of the Shemayim, both Elyonim v'Tachtainim. Now, why does it say Elyonim v'Tachtainim? So since it's talking about a Yerid over here, So therefore, Rashi uses not the lashon of the pasuk of Shamayim u'Shmei Shamayim, which these are words that appear in a pasuk, but rather he uses a lashon which fits with the idea of a yerida, which is al yenim v'tachtenim. Rashi is coming to tell us that the highest level, so to speak, of Hashem came down to the mountain, and he wants to say all of the Shamayim is in between were bent down onto Har Sinai. So he uses a lashon, a terminology that relates to a yerida coming from a high place to a low place, which is all of the heavens, the higher ones and the lower ones. Whereas in the later Rashi, in the later Parsha, the Parsha of Kimina Shamayim Dibarti, so there Rashi comes to explain the emphasis of Kimina Shamayim. Just that it has to be in a manner that doesn't contradict what it says by us, Vayer de Shemal Har Sinai. So therefore, since there's the emphasis of Kimina Shamayim, and that's what Rashi is coming to explain. So therefore Rashi adds that even though Hirkin Shamayim diminishes the emphasis of Mina Shamayim, because it's Hirkin, he bent it down. So what's the big deal, so to speak, that it's Mina Shamayim, the Shamayim were all bent down. So therefore Rashi adds that even though Hirkin Shamayim diminishes the emphasis of Mina Shamayim, however, the Hirkin Shamayim also includes Shemei Shamayim, and Shemei Shamayim represents the idea of a very high level. So this increases the loftiness of the place, that even though it was all brought down to Har Sinai, but Hashem spoke from above the Shemei Hashemayim, a very high place. It's just that it's the way that the Shemei Hashemayim are on Har Sinai. So that explains to us the difference of why Rashi over here says, why he adds the words Al Yenim V'Tachtenim, and why he uses the word specifically Al Yenim V'Tachtenim, and why over there Rashi says, and adds the words number one, Shemei Hashemayim, and why does he choose Shemei Hashemayim and not Al Yenim V'Tachtenim? Because over here the emphasis is on the Yerida, and that fits with Al Yenim V'Tachtenim, and over there the emphasis is the Min Hashemayim Dibarti, the loftiness, and that fits with Shemei Hashemayim. Now we're going to continue to answering part of question number 2, which were the Diyukim and the Rashi here, and the rest of question number 4, which were the Diyukim and Rashi over there. So since it comes out from the Parsha here that Vayered Hashem was in a manner that the Kedushas Hashchina was on Har Sinai, and to the extent that Vikidashte became holy, so therefore it's not enough that Hirkin Shemayim, that Hashem just bent the Shemayim, since that only relates that there was a general Vayered, so to speak, in space. However, not the manner of the Yerida, that Hashem descended on Har Sinai in a way that it received the Kedusha. And therefore Rashi must add, V'yitzian al gabe har, that it was placed on Har Sinai, and even more so, that it was in a manner of kematza al hamita. What does a matzah al hamita mean? It's a bed sheet on a bed. The matzah, the bed sheet, isn't a separate significant entity on its own. A person's not going to say that they're lying on the bed sheet, they're lying on the bed. Rather, it's like part of the mitah. So to here, the Shemayim didn't remain separate from Har Sinai. Rather, they became the matzah, the bedsheet of Har Sinai, and therefore it comes out that the Kedushas Hashchina was also on Har Sinai itself, because there was nothing in between. What was in between? The Shemayim al Yenim V'Tachtenim, but they were placed like a bedsheet on a bed, meaning they were completely bottled to the Har. So that means they were bottled to the Har, so if the Shechina came down onto them, it came onto the Har, and so it brought the Kedushas Hashchina into the mountain itself. However, in the pasuk of Kimina Shamayim, where the emphasis is how Hashem spoke Mina Shamayim, not from the earth. So there Rashi can't say that the pasuk is emphasizing Kematza Alamita, that the Shamayim are completely not there in a way. They have no significant existence, since that emphasizes the total opposite point, that the Shemayim was bottled to the earth, so Hashem is not speaking from the Shemayim. However, at the same time, Rashi does have to add V'hitzion. He doesn't just say Hirkin, since the Hirkin Shemayim alone doesn't resolve the contradiction from our pasuk of Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, which includes in it that there was Kedusha on Har Sinai itself, and therefore Rashi must say V'hitzion, meaning that the Shemayim didn't remain higher than Har Sinai, but rather Hirkin, he bent them down, V'hitzion al Har, and he placed them on the mountain. So there is a Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. And now we can also understand why Rashi adds the proof from the pasuk of Vayet Shemayim over there. So first of all, we already understand that each one of the teachings of Rashi are bringing out a different point. So we can understand why Rashi has a proof over there and not here. And to get into the details of the proof in the pasuk is that it's not emphasizing anything more than Vayet Shemayim, which, as we said, the Targum explains both in Shmuel as well as in Rashi. The translation of Vayet means Hirkin. And that's also true for the pasuk of Kimina Shamayim, that it's only Hirkin. The psukim are not talking about Kematza Alamita, where then it becomes Ois Shamayim. There's no longer Shamayim. The Shamayim become part of Har Sinai, which is the Mata. And then Hashem is right there on the Mata. That's not what the psukim are saying. And the Yitzian is just a continuation of a Hirkin, which is included in Vayet, that Hirkin he bent them, and to what extent? All the way down onto the mountain. He brought down the Shemayim all the way to Har Sinai. However, not more than that. And even then, they remain Shemayim. They're not Oish Shemayim. They're not Kematza Alamita. And that's why the emphasis of what it says in the pasuk, Atem Re'isim Kimina Shemayim Dibarti Imachem, it fits because the Shemayim remain Shemayim. Now we're going to move on to answering the rest of question number 2, which were the diyukim in our Rashi here. And with that, we will have answered all of the questions. So according to this, the Rashi here is coming to explain the details and the manner of the Yerid of Hashem on Har Sinai. So it's also understood where Rashi says, V'yorad kisei hakavod aleim. Not v'yorad aleim, but rather v'yorad kisei hakavod aleim. Because it says by Yitzias Mitzrayim that v'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim, that Hashem himself b'chvaydu v'atzmai went down in Mitzrayim and v'yikesi kol b'char. And nevertheless, we don't find by Yitzias Mitzrayim that there was Oshan like there was by Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. And in order to explain the difference between Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai and the Vayered Latziloi Miyad Mitzrayim, that over here there was Oshan, over there wasn't. So Rashi says Vayered Kisei HaKavod Aleim. A Kisei indicates a state of being settled, permanence, greatness, especially if it's Kisei HaKavod, and Malucha. Meaning that by Matan Torah Hashem was settled and in a permanent way with his kavod and melucha on Har Sinai. Therefore, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai brought with it all the details that are related in our parsha, which we don't find by Yitzias Mitzrayim, by the Ve'ered Latzilei Miyad Mitzrayim. You didn't have this inyan of V'yorad Kisei HaKavod Aleim. From Yenishal Torah and the Remez inside, the secrets and deeper parts of the Torah that are in Rashi, the difference between the two psukim, and so also naturally the two teachings of Rashi, what is the difference? That here the emphasis is on the Yerida, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, just that it's in a manner of Hirkin Shemayim, that also the Shemayim descended. And later, in Kimin Shemayim Dibarti Imachem, the emphasis is Min Hashamayim Dibarti Imachem, higher than the earth, just that it's in a manner that they are in a state of Hirkin. So this difference is hinted to in that the pasuk of Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai is in Perek Yotes pasuk Chof, and the pasuk of Kimin Shamayim is in Perek Chof pasuk Yotes. What's the significance of this? It says in Sfarim that Yotes is the milui of Shem Avaya, of Shema. So in short, what this means is Shem Avaya Yud Kei Vav Kei is 26. One of the Shemas of Hashem is Ma, 45. How do you get from Yud Kei Vav Kei 26 to 45? And there's also other names that are the equivalent of other numbers. How do you get there? It's through the milui. What does milui mean? So for example, instead of saying Yud is 10, we say Yud is 20. Because how do you spell Yud? Yud, Vav, Dalid. So besides for the Yud, you have a Vav and a Dalid, which are another 10. So that's the idea of milui. So it comes out that if you want to get from 26 to Shema, you have 19. So it says in Sfarim that Yud Tes 19 is the milui of Shema Vaya, of Shema. Now the idea of milui is the way the letter is said with Dibur. When you say the letter, that's when you see that there's more to it, which is the idea of Gilui Helim, which in Spheris is the Sphira of Malchus. On the other hand, Chof is the Rosh Tevis of Keser, which Keser is Makif and higher than Ishtalshalus. So we have over here Yutes being Malchus and Chof being Keser, one being Gilui Helim and one being entirely higher than Ishtalshalus. Now since all spheres are klule zubazu, they are included of one another, so therefore in Keser there is also Malchus Shabbat Keser. What does that mean? What's Malchus Keser? This means the way Keser, which is higher than the world, is in a state in motion of Gilui Lamato. It's the Malchus part of Keser. So too in Malchus, there is Keser Sheba Malchus, meaning that Keser is revealed in Malchus, meaning in Alman Dizgalion. And so this then is the difference between the two psukim. Perek Yutes Pasuk Chof, which is our Pasuk Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. What does it mean Perek Yutes Pasuk Chof? We're in Perek Yutes, and the pasuk is a detail in this Perek, so that the Chaf is a detail in the Yutes that signifies Keser Shaba Malchus. The main thing here is the Perek Yutes Malchus, and the Chaf, the Keser, is a detail in it, so that's Keser Shaba Malchus. Therefore, the general idea of Perek Yutes Malchus is Yerida, which is because that's the idea of Malchus. Just as Rashi, the Yenishal Torah reveals that what does this Yerida consist of? Hirkin Shamayim, the level of Keser Shaba Malchus. It's pasuk Chaf, it's Keser Shaba Malchus. However, Perek Chaf pasuk Yutes, that Yutes is a detail in the Chaf. The Perek is Chaf. This is a pasuk in this Perek. So the Yutes is a detail in the Chaf that signifies Malchus Shebe Keser. Yutes Malchus in the Keser. Therefore, the general idea of Perek Chaf is Min Hashamayim, the way Hashem is removed from the world, the idea of Keser. And here too, Rashi, who is the Yenishal Torah, he reveals that it's not the way Keser is for itself and in Helim, but rather it's Hirkin Shamayim, Hirkin, the level of Malchus Keser, which is the pasuk Yutes, which signifies the level of Malchus. So it's Malchus Keser. In conclusion, this is also the deeper explanation for what Rashi says on the pasuk of Vayered, that it was kematza lamito, and on the pasuk of Kimir Shamayim, he doesn't mention it. Since Keser Shel Malchus is a detail in Spheres HaMalchus, whose inyan is Yerida Lamata, so therefore also in the Keser, which is in it, there can be a Yerida and Hislapshus Lamata to the extent of Kematza Al Hamita, because that's the whole idea of Spheres HaMalchus, and that's the sphere that we're talking about. Whereas Malchus Shel Keser, this that Keser shines down here Lamata, so since Keser, in its essence, is an which is higher than the Eilames, so therefore also when it shines down here Lamata, it's not in a manner that it is mislabish in them, rather it remains in a state of makif, as expressed in the word Shamayim.